This isn't new. This isn't, oh, we need more research. Like, no, this has been researched. We've had a lot of good studies showing the safe measures and the good dosages that we need to use just from those studies alone. Now, the only things we don't know is the differences between men and women, how that affects all the other cycles, and making sure that we truly understand what, if any, changes do we see over a period of time when we've been taking it.
Welcome to the Functional Code, your go-to source for decoding optimal health. Join Dr. Addy and Dr. Jace as they break down the science behind pain, performance, longevity, and more, making complex concepts easy for you to understand and apply in your life. Your journey to a healthier you begins with understanding the Functional Code.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Functional Code. Today is part 1 of our peptide series. We are very excited. Today we're going to be talking about growth hormone peptides, which is probably one of the more common uses of peptides right now. And we're going to be getting to a lot of the great uses of these peptides and all the other things that they can actually impact other than just putting on muscle and recovery. So we're looking forward to that today, guys. Everybody, I am Dr. Addy.
I'm Dr. Jace. We are super excited to bring this episode to you. There's so much knowledge that we're going to dive into, way more in depth than most people. Now with growth hormone, that's dealing with a lot of the internal functions of the system, especially from brain's communication all the way out to internal organs and how that can affect even the external muscular skeletal tissue. We're going to dive into fat loss, the effects on skin health, anti-aging, sleep, and its effects on exercise. At the end, we're going to give you a few hypotheses of adding in some other exercise and other tools with that in combination with growth hormone peptides, and just giving you guys more information on growth hormone itself.
Yep.
But Doc, let's dive into what growth hormone is. Let's start with some of the basics, and then we can start even from a cellular standpoint, going back to even just the DNA aspect. And we're going to get way more into the weeds here, just because when doing the prep for this podcast, there's not very many people that are diving into the weeds with some of this. So we want to bring as much unbiased, upfront knowledge that we possibly can to this episode. And Doc's definitely going to do an awesome job, and I'm just going to be here curious as always. Doc, let's dive into just the growth hormone. I know it starts in the hypothalamus in the brain. The pituitary releases growth hormone to the liver, to the glucose regulation throughout the body, to muscle. It also has ties to the stomach and ghrelin, but I don't know if you want to touch on that or if we just want to dive straight into cellular senescence.
Yeah, I can touch quick on growth hormone itself, and then we can jump into cellular senescence.
Perfect.
And everybody today, excuse me, I'm getting over a little bit of a cold, so hopefully it doesn't sound too awful listening to my voice today. But just to get started, growth hormone is secreted by the pituitary gland, and it's used in what most people refer to growth hormone is used in recovery of tissue remodeling and in improving the synthesis of cell tissues, those kinds of things. Just like it states, growth hormones is used to grow tissue. Now, when we fall asleep, growth hormone is secreted to its highest peak levels, and that's where a lot of the ability to recover and remodel and grow is being done. And this is why we talk about sleep so much on our podcast, is because we all know sleep is important, but this is one of the reasons why you want to continue to sleep really well, is because when you do sleep, again, growth hormone is secreted, and you have the ability to recover, repair, and if you are going to be putting on muscle, recovering from injury, these are the things that is needed to get you to where you want to go. Growth hormone is used in a lot of parts of the body, but those are the main areas that you usually hear growth hormone affecting in the body. Further down in the podcast, we'll definitely get to a lot more of the specifics of how it's secreted and what are some of the other pathways and peptides that are involved in this process. But that is just in general what growth hormone does and how it works.
Absolutely, and thank you for even breaking that down, Doc. There's so many small avenues that growth hormone will affect, like Doc said, even back down to the cellular level. And just even with that, there's one chemical and hormone can affect another hormone, but usually hormones are regulated either on an hourly/daily, weekly basis as we go through. So just keeping that in mind as you're making changes to your system, you're going to notice that it's going to take probably a little bit of time for some of the changes to occur.
Good point.
But no, let's dive into senescent cells, and then we're going to build up from there so you guys have a general understanding and knowledge. Yes, there's going to be probably some words to that you might not understand, but we're going to try to talk in layman's terms as we can going through. So, Doc, what is cellular senescence? I know we brought this up previously in the podcast. And why is that important as we look at longevity related to growth hormone peptides?
Absolutely. We've talked about cellular senescence on the podcast before, but for those just listening in, cellular senescence is the act of when a cell breaks down or stops being as efficient as it used to be, and eventually it dies. And the act of senescence is a marker of aging. And so when we have senescent cells, as we continue to age, we're going to get more and more of them. And this is a problem. However, a lot of people are focusing on just the negative effects of senescence. There is some positive effects of senescence, and those are the things that I think we need to continue to look at if we're going to move forward. But most, if not all, of the research done on senescent cells is done on the negative effects of it. It was originally linked to what was called the shortening of telomeres. It was telomeres are, if you can remember, during the splitting of a cell, the portion of you come across the part of the cells that eventually are going to become entangled in a fashion like this, and they're the long finger-like projections that then separate, and you will have eventually the separation of two cells. But with telomeres, you can actually look at the length of the telomeres in our cells, and that is still being hypothesized as a way to see how long you're going to live, or how efficient your cells are as you continue to age. When you look at telomeres, it can maybe give you a idea of just how well your genes are stable, and if you are going to have DNA damage down the road. And so that is senescence, and kind of an understanding of how most are trying to manage senescence as they get older. But unfortunately, we are going to have senescence as we age. There's really no way around it. Now, plenty of people are trying to find the fountain of youth, and it's fun to be a part of those circles to try to understand what are the best ways to continue to improve longevity. But I think the big two, maybe even three things that can really help avoid dying early, we've talked about this, is improving your VO2 max, which is just a marker of cardiovascular health, increasing your muscle mass, and increasing your strength. Absolutely. That, without even getting into the cellular level of all of that, those three things really, I would state, are way more important than trying to get into the nitty-gritty of everything else. So we talk about the positive and the negative effects of senescence. Yes. Positive, when senescence happens, it actually does trigger tissue remodeling, and it does trigger an immune response. So this can maybe control tumor-promoting cellular cells. It can promote regenerative change, tissue remodeling, things like that. So yes, transient senescent cells can be helpful as far as that goes, but negative effects of senescent cells, I'm just going to name a few, but there are quite a few. It degrades cell signaling, so cells aren't able to talk to each other. It can cause mitochondrial dysfunction, which we know mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, so when we don't have enough energy, cells don't work right. It can lead to disease, it can increase inflammation, and it can even inhibit stem cell function. And again, we know just how important stem cell function is when we do go back to the stem cell podcast. A few of the things that we look at as far as characteristics of what a senescent cell looks like, they look different compared to a healthy cell. So their size is different, their shape is different, they have DNA damage, they have loss of what's called Lammin B1, which is involved in cell stability. And when it gets to this point, right now there are a few thoughts to why senescent cells are getting triggered to happen. Number one, it's induced by telomere erosion. So when those telomeres are shortened, there is this induction of senescence. And that's why so many researchers are focusing on telomere attrition, understanding just how the health of the telomeres can affect senescent cells. It can also be induced by chronic physiological stress, injuries, like even osteoarthritis, like all these other diseases that can cause these changes in the cells, anti-cancer treatments like chemo, even systemic inflammation. Now, all these things can put stress on the cells, they put stress on the mitochondria, and it can promote disease. And so that's why, really just senescence at the base, and I'll get to how this ties into growth hormone, it starts to lower all of the things that we can put out hormone-wise, stem cell health-wise, mitochondrial health-wise. And that's why we start to look at, as we age, how do these markers change and why is that important? So
that's a really good foundation too. So like understanding like the basics of how cells grow, how they die, is all stemming from senescence, and then other factors can affect that, and that makes a lot of sense too. And I like how you brought that down, even some stuff that I had no idea about, like even involving the loss of lamina B1 in terms of the cell stability. That was incredibly unique. Just even the triggers too, it makes a lot of sense. Like we say these things of inflammation throughout the body or like physiological stress, but even dive into the small specifics on how big of an impact that is at a cellular level is incredible. Now, in terms of as we go into the levels in terms of the ages, I think that changes throughout the life.
Yeah,
is that right?
Exactly. And now tying it to the actual secretion of growth hormone and IGF-1, which is insulin growth factor 1, which is used again in promoting tissue remodeling and health. We tend to look at those together because they have a synergistic effect on the body. So growth hormone levels in the peak stages of our lives, usually during puberty and adolescence is when they're the highest. When we start to even get into the 20s, your growth hormone can start declining.
Wow.
By the age of 30, growth hormone levels can approximately reduce by anywhere from 20 to 80%.
Wow.
Now, some of the research has, again, big ranges depending on where you take care of yourself, your health, and those things like that. But there have been research showing an 80% loss by the age of 30 in growth hormone during these stages. And by 60, some say even only 10% of peak levels are observed compared to adolescents. We talk about why would this even be something we try to go to improve or work towards when aging is just going to happen, and that's just something we maybe can't even affect. And that's not true at all. I've measured these levels in patients that were younger, were older, and there are times when those levels don't change comparative to someone who's younger. It's just because they ate really well, they moved their body, and they took care of the things that they needed to take care of, and those levels actually stayed relatively high compared to someone who maybe didn't in the same age group. And that's really going to change so many factors down the road, especially when we talk about muscle mass, growth, VO2, all the things that growth hormone is so crucially needed for when we look towards longevity and we look towards performance. That's where we really need to continue to measure these markers in the body. Again, like IGF, it's the same. Peak in the young, it starts to decline in the 20s. By age 40, they say it can decrease by about 20 to 50%.
That's unreal. Like just such a steep drop off as you age.
Yeah.
And
testosterone is the same way. All of these markers are going to continue to drop as we age, and it's important that we continue to keep them promoted.
I almost wonder back, like when, let's say, anywhere from like the 50s to the 80s, on how healthier America
for sure
was. And I would be so curious to see if we were to take half the research that we do today with the population base that is pretty much sick. They just don't show symptoms as much for the most part. But we look at those levels way back when, less processed food, more exercise, movement. I'm sure there'd be a lot of differences between those two. But in terms of as we move forward, why is it essential to manage these different levels between the insulin levels and growth hormone levels? And I guess does it affect more on a deeper level?
Yeah, absolutely. So like I said before, GH and IGF-1 have this synergistic effect on the body. They have the ability to promote cell growth, proliferation, increase the growth of tissue if needed, especially if there's been damage or you've been working out. And these things are, they're essential for that process. So when we start to lose the secretion peak levels of GH and IgF, it can start to actually raise cortisol, number one. And we know cortisol is the stress hormone, and that can cause inflammation, a lot of other things. Number two, it can actually cause sarcopenia. Sarcopenia is the loss of muscle tissue and its overall effectiveness, maybe the way to put it.
That's a good statement.
And again, why is that important? Muscle mass, huge marker of longevity. So when we don't have that, we're not going to stay healthy longer. We're not going to live longer. And we're probably not going to have a quality of life as we age, because those are, again, essential for longevity. And then lastly, when we have the reduction of GH and IgF through certain pathways, it can actually increase what's called insulin sensitivity. And lastly, it can actually cause what's called a decrease in insulin sensitivity. And when we don't have sensitive receptors to insulin,
Well stated.
that is where we start to see, again, changes in health and longevity. People have said, so many people I've talked to have said, that's the one thing that they focus on as far as like these longevity experts. They only look at their blood sugar and management of insulin throughout their life. That is the one marker they only look at to improve the quality of their life. They say that if you want to live long, manage your insulin levels.
That's fascinating.
And so, again, when we see the reduction of GH and IgF, we can get resistance, and that's where we're going to see a continuation of issues like weight gain, inability to lose weight, and have all of these other issues regulating blood sugar.
Which makes a lot of sense, going back to like people that just even have glucose monitors. Like obviously we always go, like our system is set up for managing people that are sick and not the preventative side of things. And I know we touched on this months back in terms of just back to that factor, monitoring insulin levels. If you can find a doctor that obviously will help prescribe you a glucose monitor, or just even buying one yourself, and then monitoring that on a consistent basis throughout your life, I think just going back to the longevity, what are your goals? It makes a lot of sense from there.
And then you want to look at just all of the things that have been tied to poor blood sugar management, which for those of you, I'm sure you understand, those who struggle with blood sugar typically are diabetics. And the things that they have to deal with when they have that disease, whether it's type 1 or type 2, it can cause so many issues, and it can cause an early death in a lot of them. And it can even cause what's called type 3 diabetes, or if you've heard of it, Alzheimer's. And that's where you see this pattern developing with all of these issues in patients who can't effectively manage their blood sugar levels. So wound healing is very difficult in diabetics. They don't have the ability to heal quickly. Usually in type 2 diabetics, they're obese. So their ability to lose weight quickly, they don't have the ability to. Again, they have a lot of resistance with their insulin. And that is crucial, because if we're going to effectively manage the cell and try to get fat shrinkage, we need to be able to get sugar away from everything when we want to. And we need to be able to move it how we want to and utilize it if needed.
Yes.
And so when we don't have that ability and sugar continues to stay in the blood, it's going to cause more inflammation, and it's going to continue to dampen all the receptors as we would want insulin to be able to do its job. So all of the things, again, has this pattern showing when we don't have the ability to regulate this process, it's only going to cause further and further issues down the road. Now, a lot of people don't even understand that neuropathy, or pain in the feet from dying nerve cells, can be a huge cause by, again, too much sugar in the blood. And this is when I learned about this way, it made a lot of sense to me. But the reason why diabetics develop feet pain, numbness, and tingling is because when they have too much sugar in the blood, nerve cells don't actually require insulin to take in sugar. And so when we do have too much sugar in the blood, nerve cells just take that sugar in when it wants to, without any regulation. And that can cause what's called cytotoxicity. And when we have too much sugar, it creates a cytotoxic effect, now we have a death of a nerve cell.
And then neuropathy.
As nerves die, that is neuropathy. That's why they call it neuropathy. And so we understand all of this, and it makes sense when you put it together. But we talk about it as if this is just things you need to do and why you need to do that. But sometimes it's nice to understand just the underground fundamentals of it, so that why is it important to do these kinds of things? And that is why. This is exactly why.
Absolutely. So going back to so if you guys didn't catch that, if you have diabetes or you are more of an overweight for longer periods of time, more for the type 2 diabetics or potentially thereof, if you start getting like numbness in the feet that won't necessarily go away, this process could be affecting your nerve cells, kind of what Doc said from there. So definitely, by all means, you want to get that checked out sooner than later. And then not to just, and if you feel like things aren't right, you can always go get a second opinion as well, just even from that front. But I really like your comment based on the type 3 with Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
I never connected those two together.
That's a problem too, because we know that Alzheimer's is a process that generally starts in your 30s, 40s. So now it doesn't mean you're going to have symptoms, but it is something that you really can't monitor until the symptoms start to happen, which again, usually it's later in life. And when you don't have the ability to understand what you need to manage, it's more of a preventative effect. You need to understand that these processes are going to happen. Symptoms may not occur right away, but that's just is important, even though you're not able to see what's going on in the body or feeling it at the time.
Absolutely. So I know a lot of people are going to be questioning, okay, so this peptides, how does that play a role into this growth hormone pathway, and how does it affect the body? Because I know if someone's thinking, okay, I should probably look to possibly take peptides, or they've heard it before, they're curious, like where to start. And I think we're going to probably talk about more of the basics and get into more specifics with this here. But Doc, peptides.
Let's get into that. That's great. So when we talk about peptides, are just chains of amino acids that largely play a role in signaling, and that's really where they're. And a lot of them are called peptide hormones. And so if you think of it more as hormones that regulate, again, signals, understanding what the body needs to do, that's where you have the ability to make an impact on, let's say, growth hormone and IgF. So we start off in the hypothalamus. When it's needed, hypothalamus will release what's called GHRH, or growth hormone releasing hormone. And that stimulates the anterior portion of the pituitary gland, which secretes growth hormone. And where peptides play is you can ingest these growth hormone peptides. Some of them, and I'll get to this in a little bit, act on different parts of the brain, but that certain portion right there in the hypothalamus that releases GHRH, there are peptides that actually can mimic that peptide to get the pituitary gland to secrete GH. So the types of peptides, I usually only work with CJC 1295 in this category, but there are a few others like Tesamorelin, Sermorelin. And so these peptides, when you ingest them, that's the cellular mechanism that it acts on. It tries to look like GHRH so that it can get you to secrete more growth hormone.
Fascinating. Okay.
And that's where these peptides can come into play. Now you take a look at the other side of the process, which can help increase growth hormone, would be ghrelin. Now ghrelin is what most of us understand as the hunger hormone. So when ghrelin is created in the brain, it's also created in the stomach as well. That's why we was connected to food. It again can then act on the anterior pituitary to secrete growth hormone. So there are other peptides that look a lot like ghrelin, and when you ingest them, it can cause this pituitary secretion of GH. But ghrelin does some other things as well. It makes you hungry. It's what you would call maybe more like an anabolic hormone. It really helps you to grow and eat and fuel yourself. So when you take peptides like Ipamorelin, MK677, you can have an effect of a change in hunger or appetite. Just the opposite would be a GLP-1, a drug. It would be like Ozempic, which is the opposite. It actually inhibits a lot of the hormones that make you hungry, and actually uptick the ones that make you feel full or satiated. When you take a look at these processes, it's important to know that you could take two different ways to do it primarily. And you have to understand that if you're going to do this, and this is a hypothesis, we might even get to that later on, but when you get to starting to use peptides, you're starting to play a role in how your body secretes things. And that's important because we don't understand really right now the long-term effects of using an exogenous peptide for that signal to create a change in growth hormone. However, a lot of the people that I've studied under and followed, they've done a lot of the anecdotal evidence to measure these levels over time. And they show no cyclical change in growth hormone secretion when using peptides.
Fascinating. Okay.
Different than using, let's say, synthetic growth hormone. Because that's truly the end result down the line of this pathway, such as testosterone. Now, if we were to take supplements that helped to create more secretion of test versus actually taking exogenous testosterone, there's two different things. And so that's where a lot of people get worried about peptides is they're going to create a change in how we output hormones, and it's going to have this long-term effect down the road. And I think I'm going to argue that and say it's a lot safer than we thought. And you're going to see that it's going to have not as much effects long-term than we originally are seeing. And I think we're going to have a research that will prove that, hopefully within the next how many years? Few years, 5 years. Hopefully no less than 10 years.
Yes. And I know some of the research I looked into, obviously definitely not as much as Doc here, but there's a lot of peptide research on like animals, rats, definitely a few studies on humans. I think we definitely need more studies, especially larger studies and for longer periods of time. But I saw nothing but positive feedback. But I don't think a lot of people understood like the exogenous versus just even the peptides and what are like the differences between those two. Obviously going from the safer side, which helps, which is awesome there. But
and I'm glad you brought up research, because one of the main studies that a lot of researchers like to state why we should be a little more worried is this study done on patients with dwarfism. And dwarfism was a lack of GH, lack of growth hormone, and so they didn't fully develop everything, bones, stature, height, muscle, everything like that. However, in the study, they put a 20 times the amount of dosage that we would that people would normally take just for therapeutic effect. Now, this was done to just try to ramp up as much growth hormone as possible. So yes, long term, they saw a reduction in output because of just how much peptide they were taking. Now, you go and look at the therapeutic dose that a lot of doctors will recommend you take, or even just from the research that they're doing, it is literally a fraction of what they were taking in these studies. So that's another thing you got to look at when you hear people talk about research and you hear people trying to sway you one way or the other. That, again, is way different than what we would be taking comparative to the study. And a lot of people don't realize peptides have been being studied since the 90s. I think even earlier than that. But most of what I've seen on growth hormone peptides came out in the 90s.
Like
so people
years.
have been using these for 30 years, for sure. And I know some guys who have actually studied, they have been using it. One guy I know has been using it for 24 years. This isn't new. This isn't, we need more research. Like, no, this has been researched. We've had a lot of good studies showing the safe measures and the good dosages that we need to use just from those studies alone. Now, the only things we don't know is the differences between men and women, how that affects all the other cycles, and making sure that we truly understand what, if any, changes do we see over a period of time when we've been taking it. The general consensus is if you're going to do a peptide, just cycle it, and that's safe enough. Do you have to? Probably not, but just cycle it. You would take it for 4 weeks on, 4 weeks off, or maybe 8 weeks on, 8 weeks off. Okay. And that's really the consensus. And I agree with that. I would state that if we do have any concern at all, that would be one that would take care of that concern pretty quickly, because, and you can measure these markers anytime you want. So if we were to see a decrease after maybe a month or two of using that, I mean, let's say you were done taking it and then you can measure it later and it's been reduced, well, then maybe we have an understanding of that. But typically that's not what, you don't see that at all. You don't see that at all. See that they're actually raised and they stay raised for quite some time.
That's so interesting. Now, even when, and I don't want to jump topic too much here, but when you said go in cycles, like 4 weeks on, 4 weeks off, I immediately think, okay, in terms of the broad spectrum of the year and possibly maybe location of where you are at and how the effects of the sun, the day, the times, how they can affect different levels. Because I know we know in terms of the effects to the circadian rhythm, with food, with sleep, growth hormone is automatically playing a factor to that. So is there any information that related to the times of year with cycling, or is it just based on like levels?
That's good. Yeah, research? That's a really, and again, those are the kind of questions that will stimulate more research, because it does have it absolutely will have an effect like that. There might be times during the year where the states of stress, whether the climate has an effect on that, whether or not you're sleeping better or worse, or whether or not you're training. These are all things that I'm sure have a great reason to be studied. And it's only going to then tailor in why we would want to use peptides or versus why we wouldn't. So we're still definitely in the guinea pig phase on a lot of these parts. However, I think it's questions like that that is going to hopefully stimulate researchers to pick up heavily studying peptides again, which if you know, I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty of that, but a lot of peptides right now are being purchased or being banned. When I say banned, before you jump into your conspiracy or your red flags are coming off, what is being banned is the production of peptides by compounding pharmacies. And
in the United States.
In the United States. Now, use of peptides are not banned. Okay, you can still try to get them. They're not illegal. No one's going to come into your home and say, "Oh, you have peptides, I'm taking you to jail." It's not a problem. And the number one drug in the world right now is a peptide drug, Ozempic. And peptides have a target on them. Pharmaceutical companies don't like to lose money. In fact, they like to gain so much money that they don't even know what to do with. And they're getting smarter. They're seeing that peptides are actually a safer, more effective drug when they can make it into a drug. Yes, my assumption is they have a handle on this, and they are causing the FDA to make these changes so that they can protect their intellectual property and so that other peptides don't mingle with the production of their drugs. And eventually they'll probably just buy those peptides and create them in the drugs just like they did with Ozempic. Ozempic is semaglutide, which is a peptide turned into a drug. And tirzepatide is the newest peptide turned drug. It's more effective, less side effects, and that's what you're going to see, in my opinion. You're going to see a lot more peptide drugs on the market with the suppression of the actual peptide itself from compounding pharmacies. You cannot get, unless if you're out there and you want a compounding pharmacy in the United States, please tell me, because I've been looking for this forever. But most of the time, you have to go outside of the country to get some of these peptides, and it's a shame because they are incredibly safe. But that's just what stage we're in right now, and I hope a lot of that changes. You're even seeing semaglutide and tirzepatide starting to get banned, which have been the last two to get banned. Those were the ones that usually you could get from a compounding pharmacy quite easily. Everything else had pretty much been banned. But now you're already seeing cease and desist letters into those compounding pharmacies, which again is just showing the trend of pharma trying to be the king and not letting anyone else try to make a profit or make change to people in a safe way.
It's fascinating enough. Like, even so, we went shopping yesterday with my wife, and she picks out some shampoo, some conditioner, and of course, when we get home, I saw it said peptides on the bottom, man.
Oh yeah.
I'm like, okay, what are the odds of this? So that we're recording the next day, and even going back to the big pharma, how they can control the narrative, like we looked on some of the rules with YouTube videos and promoting some of that too. It's anything that is speculative or anything that can be misconstrued in different ways or doesn't have enough research, they'll limit that. So even from an industry standpoint, they won't even allow us more than likely to promote. I'm going to try, but
we're censored.
Exactly.
We're
So
being
it's
censored.
coming top down.
And I'm not sitting here, I hope none of you have got that, but I'm not telling any of you to just go and start injecting growth hormone peptides. I have yet to say that. I don't think I will say that. Because I'm going to get to a point in here where I say, if you're going to do this, I want you to visit a doctor first. You know?
Yes.
And again, they really are pushing that narrative. I'm glad you brought that up, because this isn't the first time and it won't be the last.
Oh, definitely not. And just even monitoring like blood levels with doctors as well. And someone that feels confident with some of this stuff, like naturopath medicine.
Yep. Functional medicine.
Yeah.
There's a lot of MDs that are shifting their focus to this medicine as well, which is great, because such a great source of knowledge. They have a great source of knowledge on this stuff.
So Doc, going into some of the specifics and the scenarios that most people will want to use the peptides for, so what are those scenarios, and what would make people think, okay, maybe I am a possible candidate for peptide therapy or growth hormone peptide?
Yeah.
What's your perspective on that?
Yeah. First and foremost, before I even mention any of this, I'm not telling you to use peptides anytime you want or just to go and do this by yourself. There's still a lot of regulation and understanding. Peptides is even to do by yourself. I want you guys to even look up how you would use peptides by yourself. It is very difficult. It is very difficult. There is a process called reconstitution that you need to do with most peptides. They come in a lyophilized form. And so there needs to be a reconstitution with a certain dosage. You need to understand what dosage each peptide would come in, which is all peptides are different. You also need to know how to reconstitute them to a certain milliliter of liquid. You need to also know what liquid, because there's different liquids that you would maybe use to reconstitute. So before you were to just say, I'm going to go do some peptides, it might actually be a lot more difficult than you think. So number one, to make this just way easier, just use a physician. And why I would recommend that, number one, would be they have the ability to measure blood markers first to see if this is even something that would be recommended for you. Now, most healthy 20-year-olds are going to have normal levels of test GH and IgF. That's the case. Now, argument is, I want to get to a more supraphysiological level. And it's like, okay, well, do you know what that looks like?
And why do you want this?
Exactly. Well, the physician's going to understand that. They're going to understand, okay, I know how to take it to maybe that upper level or even a little bit higher. But if we don't track it or measure it, and if you're a physician not doing that, then I'm already going to argue you, because these are important things. We don't know enough about this not to measure. When I look at doing peptides, that's what the things that I'm going to be most focused on is the measurement of these levels. Because if I'm not looking at them, then I don't know what's going on. You need to use a physician, and you need to be very cognizant of those levels as you continue to try and make changes to these levels. Don't just buy peptides off of Reddit and do them in your basement. Okay, so most people though are using peptides, growth hormone peptides, for exactly that, muscle growth and recovery. They're trying to gain some weight. They're trying to improve recovery, improve the tissue remodeling phase, and have a lot less either pain or just accelerated growth.
Is that with injuries as well?
For sure.
Okay.
For sure. In fact, some of the best peptide stacks involve growth hormone peptides for injury. BPC would be one of the other major peptides for injury, but we'll get into BPC maybe later on. Maybe later. I don't know if we will. I don't know. We might have to. But that's got to be one of the more common peptides that are being used just for the general population. But typical dosage of growth hormone peptides, either CJC or Ipamorelin, you'll see it used either 5 or 7 days a week, just depending on general anecdotal consensus. There are times where you would use it daily. There are times where you'd maybe use it once a day, twice a day. I mean, I know some people that have used it a lot. Like they're using it in heavy doses. I really don't have a standard dose that maybe most people could just take and go and use, because I think it's different in everyone.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's where it's important to understand your levels first before you go and make those changes. And you can actually use these peptides differently for certain changes, anecdotally. Well, this is just, again, you can use it, a lot of people use it for more of an anti-aging effect versus fat loss versus anabolism or injury. You would need to understand why first and then how, and that's going to be the most important. So Dr. William Seeds is a medical doctor who is very well versed in peptides. He states for anti-aging, he just does 100 micrograms before bed. For fat loss, he does 100 micrograms bedtime and morning. And for anabolism or the growth stage, which is what most guys I'm sure are looking for, is 100 grams before bed, 100 grams in the morning, and then 100 micrograms before bed, 100 micrograms in the morning, and then 100 micrograms post-workout. It can actually be used with other peptides as well as a stack, but we can get to that maybe a little bit later. And then injury, he recommends 100 micrograms before bed, 100 micrograms in the morning, 2 more dosages, split 3 hours in between at just 100 micrograms. So just making sure you're taking it at least 4 times a day. But 100 micrograms before bed, morning, and then 2 more times at a 3-hour split. So many different ways to take this peptide.
Fascinating.
I don't think a lot of people are talking about how to take them. And again, I'm not telling you go and do this. I'm saying this is how it's done. Now, there might be times where you take less micrograms, maybe more micrograms. There are times where you might skip days because you're feeling a certain effect. Yes, peptides do have some side effects, and that's where you got to just listen to your body. Standard dosing doesn't mean do this only and don't ask questions. It just means this is a guide, and listen to your body.
Smart.
As you move forward with maybe this journey.
That's beautiful.
But some of the things that you're going to see, change in muscle mass, fat loss, improved recovery, energy, better sleeps, even better change in skin. We're going to get to that later. Even changes in mood or mental clarity. All these things you can possibly be getting from these growth hormone peptides.
Wow.
Yeah.
Makes sense, yeah. Coming top down based on where growth hormones secrete from brain to the stomach, so that's the ghrelin, then brain to the muscle tissue, and just even the regulation of glucose levels via insulin. It all works with one. And going back to your point too, like being specific, like whether you're a male, female, the age range, the weight, I'm sure to a certain extent. There's so many small factors. Well, I really like and appreciate how you brought that about, that there's not a necessary dosage or scheme that every single person can follow. That's where the physician, like you said, comes in, and for them to be very cognizant of every small little factor, and then obviously taking blood work and taking any other condition into consideration when doing some of these therapies is top tier, and I think should be definitely a priority for most people when they want to go down this pathway.
Yep.
So I appreciate you for that one. Is there anything else on that point?
No, I think just that's definitely the general use. But obviously, as we will get into here, there are some other incredible uses for these peptides as well.
So some of those other things would be fat loss, skin health, sleep.
Yeah, so we'll start with fat loss. A lot of people actually are losing weight on growth hormone peptides.
Cool.
And you go across and you see all these people trying these peptides, and most of them are trying to gain weight with them, a lot of them are performance athletes, bodybuilders, those kinds of things. But what people don't understand is by stimulating the pituitary gland, you are also enhancing a metabolic process, metabolism. And this elevated GH can actually even maybe lead up to fat oxidation. You can have a shift in energy, and I guess the process that is the most effective would be changing the use from carbohydrates to fat usage. So we do see this thermic effect change, this induction of lipolysis. Now, if you are eating the right amount of caloric intake, you're going to probably reduce that chance of happening. But with that uptick in thermic output, caloric output, and you maybe not understanding that, and let's say your diet doesn't change using this, then now you're, again, more out than in, you're going to have that effect. As you enhance muscle growth, muscle has a very high resting metabolic rate. It is a calorie burner, having a lot of muscle. So again, you're going to see that because it starts to get added.
Okay.
And then we talked a little bit about this, but Sermorelin can improve insulin sensitivity, which when you're improving insulin sensitivity, you now have the ability to regulate your metabolism, the glucose, and you can reduce fat storage. So that's all three things that when you start to think about why growth hormone would maybe have that effect versus not, it's important to think about. Because if you're going to go into this thinking I want to add a bunch of weight, but I'm not going to do the important steps that also is needed to add weight and muscle, if you're out there and you're thinking that I'm just going to take this and get jacked and not have to work, that's not how this works. You have to. There's still no miracle pill out there. I'm sorry today wasn't the miracle pill message that you wanted, so you have to work less hard and you get the results. What is it? It's an enhancer. It enhances the ability to do these things.
So then going back to that point, then you would want to make sure that your diet, the sleep is right, that what you're doing, if you want to gain weight, then you have to do specific exercises, specific times, like you said.
All the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 things we've ever talked about. I know you know that out there. But I think what it can bring light to is instead of using a GLP-1 like Ozempic and semaglutide or tirzepatide, which can have some harsh side effects, this might be one you can try instead, which doesn't have as many and can be just as effective.
That's beautiful.
Possibly.
That's a good clip right there. Okay, because I know my wife was asking me when I was put together a little bit of this outline. She said skin health, and I was told I'd probably learn more today from you on that. But in terms of skin health, anti-aging, I know we touched on this in terms of blood glucose levels, the blood flow and receptors, even from the hormone and how it goes out to different parts of the body. But Doc, let's dive into skin health, and I'm curious.
Yeah, and this isn't one that they went into the hypothesis of when people started using growth hormone peptides.
Okay.
You really just thought you were going to gain some weight and get jacked. That was the initial hypothesis. Not only, and you could hypothesize changes in sleep because we know growth hormone is secreted highly during that stage. But what they didn't realize was just how much patients were getting changes in their skin. And when they really started to see the positive side effect of using GH peptides, you started to think about why or possibly how that could be a player in this realm of health. So when you just think about it from a few ways here, you start to increase muscle mass. From that, you have better blood circulation, delivers more oxygen to nutrients to the skin cells, promotes vitality. Okay. Then, with more blood flow, you have the ability to regenerate and repair cells, tissues such as skin. And so now we're starting to see that might be a play from this too. Obviously, with muscle mass, you now have support to the underlying structures of the skin. So you can prevent sagging and your toner, and you can start to see changes that way. So as far as it doesn't moisturize the skin, but it makes the skin look healthier and it makes you look more toned and healthy. And then lastly, we talk about collagen, right? Which very crucial for the skin structure. But Ipamorelin has been shown to stimulate collagen synthesis. And that's where I think the later research can be being done, is it's not just about getting jacked. It can absolutely be about affecting that process too. And so again, we know just how crucial collagen is for the breakdown in skin. Helping its production can boost the ability for it to repair and even prevent damage from stressors and aging. And a lot of people actually talk about taking a collagen peptide supplement every day because it is just so helpful. Collagen too, not just to the skin, but a lot of other parts of the body. We know joint health, other things like that too.
To that point too, like you guys might not know this, but I think research right now, there's about 33 different types of collagen.
Is that right?
Make sure, obviously, joints, other connective tissues, but even other aspects that they're looking on a cellular level of different strains, if we will, that are unique, and they keep adding them as time goes on. But when you say collagen, there's more specifics to this, but in general terms.
For sure. So the hypothesis of why patients are seeing better health of their skin when they're taking these whole peptides.
I had no idea. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Just even like that, you said that case study between like Ipamorelin and this collagen synthesis. even for that elasticity, not even just even that for the skin, but even for the tissue repair. So it's attacking all the skeletal tissues for the most part, which is cool. And I know there's a part that even with the heart tissue that it could possibly have effects on based on decrease in inflammation portion, which we'll get to in a sec. But man, so we've taken consideration that factor. Now let's look at sleep, and because obviously growth hormone is a way more increased during sleep for the repair process.
Yeah.
Doc, walk me through that one from your perspective.
And we'll probably get to this at a later podcast. So listen in. For those of you that aren't going to get it in depth today, it's just because I don't want to get too far off track with the general uses of GH peptides. But again, like we talked about, when you go to sleep, your GH needs to rise and get to a certain level, and cortisol needs to drop. And when we're really stressed, cortisol can be raised, which is why when you're stressed, can't sleep. And that's the very generalized concept. But so we know after the podcast, just listening in, Ipamorelin or CJC, all the other types of GH peptides, causes that GH to get secreted more. And when we have the ability to raise growth hormone, the body then can recognize that it's getting into sleep and triggers all the other processes that need to happen to get to sleep, which there's many, including the proper neurotransmitter releases like GABA, something, or even melatonin. Your core body temperature needs to drop to a certain. That's why sleeping in the cold is so helpful.
Light sensitivity to the eyes.
Exactly.
As well. There's a lot.
On top of all the other things, yes, it can be an enhancer of sleep. I'm not saying use it as a sleep drug, but it can maybe help enhance the quality of your sleep because it can help get you the secretion of growth hormone that is needed. The research does show that it can affect deep sleep, so just proceed with caution. There are still definitely needs to be more research being done, but you get a deeper sleep with using Ipamorelin, but it might have an effect on REM sleep. We still don't know yet. It's almost like we're skipping a stage and we didn't quite get there how we wanted to. But again, we still have a lot of research to get to before. I know Huberman talked about this on his podcast. He said that when he used it, he felt like he got a really deep sleep, but when he used the sleep tracking technology that he uses, it showed a reduction in REM sleep.
So those that don't know, in terms of sleep, there's stages between stages 1, 2, 3, 4 REM, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 REM, 1, 2, 3, 4 REM. So it goes in waves and cycles, but it ends with more REM sleep, so that's why you want to sleep long.
So we really don't know the true effects of what Ipamorelin is doing on the stages of sleep. There's not a lot of research on it. So my guess would be it helps to stimulate stage 2, which would be that phase. And but again, if it's stimulating stage 2, we're missing stage 1. I don't know. I'm not sure the end stage results.
Yeah, no, and thank you. So Doc, in terms of the precautions when using the peptides, obviously go through a physician, but is there anything else that maybe physicians need to know when looking at many different factors?
Yeah, and so from a provider standpoint, the more you know, the better. I'm sure most are doing the proper measurements, blood measurements, objective data to really understand how the peptides are affecting their patients. But patients, that is something that is very important if you're going to be doing peptides, is measuring what's being changed ultimately. But again, it's understanding the differences in GH peptides. Would you use a peptide that attacks the more of the ghrelin side of things or GHRH? Why? How? All those things are very important. Can I use them together? You can. You absolutely can. But why would you want to do that? And that's going to be another, concept that you got to think about first. And there are plenty of people that when they jump right into peptides, they do a stack right away. They do like a CJC Ipamorelin stack is probably the two most common. Question is, why would you do that? And the better question is, would it be smarter to just try one, see how that works, and then maybe try the second one after that? And then if both go, then maybe pair them together. I don't know. These are all things that I think about, obviously, because you need to take time before you get into something like this. There's a lot of thought that should be taken before you would just randomly ingest this stuff. But yeah, you can stack these. But ultimately, I don't ever recommend you do this by yourself.
That's beautiful. And yeah, looking down even like the complexities, like that's, I feel like how skilled certain practitioners should be when talking about this to their patients. You have to know different pathways that certain hormones can affect, and if they affect that, does it throw off any other levels in terms of possible side effects too?
Yep.
And just like actually mentally thinking through the process and not just going through the motions, which in our society and today, if you go to a provider and you're in and out in a few minutes, there's way more risk of stuff that could go wrong, in my opinion, just based on that factor alone.
Yeah.
You definitely want to make sure a physician or who's ever prescribing or helping you with this process of peptides, that they're mentally fully there and they think about all these small things. And that's where question, if you're thinking that you want to go into this, like ask, like, what's your thought process on different chemical pathways that can affect, and just ask as many questions related to the peptide or related to whatever goal that you want. I think it would be really smart too.
Yeah.
But
So Doc, I know just with the knowledge base that you have on performance, exercise, just really the incredible background that you have, I know you've prepared a lot of information about just that portion of things and how that can affect GH2. Do you want to jump a little bit into some of the studies that you have, and of course just how you don't even sometimes need some of these things to raise growth hormone? Sometimes just doing the same things that we talk about day to day can be just enough. But obviously I'll have my 2 cents with everything as well. But yeah, do you want to just talk a little bit about that too?
of course, so I dove into a few studies specifically relating to the body's regulation of growth hormones throughout the body. And there's a couple of things that, when thinking about it, I wouldn't have thought this prior to looking at some of this research. So the study's name is like synthetic growth hormone releasing peptides. And they notice a couple different effects. They notice that there is an inflammatory response reduction, especially for cardiac muscles, which they're theorizing almost like a side effect that can help decrease the inflammatory response, which can help people that are undergoing myocardial infarction or a stroke thereof. And that will be based on the directly protecting the parenchymal organelles of the epithelial cells, which will then help stimulate the immune effector cells as well. So just even on that standpoint, it also helped with antioxidant defense based on like reactive oxygen species, or ROS, which will also help with the inflammatory response. That was interesting. Going back to just even the effect of the gastric mucosal level with some of these other hormones. So I know we talked about ghrelin and the growth hormones, a connection to the stomach. They found that the suppression of the vagal signal on the stomach included gastric acid secretion, which they showed that it helped prevent and curing certain ulcers.
Oh, wow.
And in terms of tissue repair, it definitely helped improve some people's inflammatory response for strokes, which there was an image in the study that we'll put up, but there was a difference between the heart muscles and the looks of, and just even the size of the heart muscles with some of these peptides being introduced. So that gives us more insight to possibly utilizing this as we go through, but it's just a few small things that I think will help give us a general understanding for improving heart function.
That's awesome. I mean, that's crazy. I had no idea that it had that kind of abilities as well. Obviously we understand the tissue repair processes, but the fact that it has a play on inflammation and protection of the heart during that intense state of disease, that's incredible. I did not know that.
There's a lot of small things that I feel like what we said previously that will help significantly improve the humans and our functions moving forward. But there's another study as well too. It was called the 20-hour growth hormone secretory profiles following aerobic and resistant exercise. And I was curious between the types of exercise and the duration, because I know as we go through longer bouts of exercises, the more demand it has on our body, which then has a metabolic function. So thinking from top down, brain down, of the effects on that. And this study was between this one and the last study I'm going to go over, there is almost contrasting points of view,
Okay.
which is that's where the question arises. But they took, for this one, a group of about 80 males, and they put them on a very strict diet. They also took blood levels every 20 minutes throughout the 20-hour period, so they can see during and after the exercise and the specific exercise. So there was a randomized control of 5 different possibilities, one of which there is either no exercise, which was the control group. The other one was a moderate duration, so it's just about an hour of cardio exercise work. And then there was another group of long duration, so 2 hours of aerobic exercise. Then there was a moderate, like 1 hour of resistance exercise, and then a long duration, like 2 hours of resistance exercises. Okay. So they found out between, and going back to, they monitored their diet, the sleep, the physical activity level throughout, so they could really zone in on the specific effects. And they noticed a couple things. The main conclusion with this is that the most of the growth hormone was excreted from aerobic exercise, so that's just cardio work for anywhere from 1 to 2 hours, had way more of a growth hormone secretion over a 20 period time than resistance exercise.
Dang.
Which kind of threw my mind off. And I'm thinking, okay, if we have more blood flow going to the tissue systemically, it would make a lot of sense to help with the connection to those receptors. But at the same time, if people are thinking, okay, we want to build up muscle tissue, maybe they would spend more time resistance exercise. But that's where, and this was only a study of about 80 males, which not even considering the whole nother gender of females as a whole thing in itself, but that just gives us a question on reasons why, and to go into more testing and studies moving forward.
And it shows if you're going to be in the gym, you better be adding aerobic exercise into that portion of things, because that's incredible.
And then to counteract that, there was another study based on, it was called the exercise-induced growth hormone response in athletes, and they looked at this in a couple different ways. So they suggested that there was an exercise-induced growth hormone response, and you had to get to that point where you can start the secretion of growth hormone. And a lot of that was based on exercise intensity above the lactic threshold, and that is for a minimum of 10 minutes to elicit the greatest stimulus of the growth hormone. That's where when you think about this, like that's telling me that as you go through, you need a high bout of exercise done throughout the whole body so you reach lactic threshold. And necessarily what that means is you're doing energy output to where, one, you can't have a conversation at that time. Yeah. And you're giving full expenditure of the body. So that could be theoretically resistance exercise or HIIT workouts or CrossFit workouts to a certain extent. Sure. But if you combine maybe long duration with maybe at the end burning out and ending with a sprint, with longer bouts of intense exercise, the best you possibly can for at least 10 minutes, I think that between those two, I think can stimulate the best effect. So combining both those studies together is interesting, but it almost looked at two sides of the spectrum between those two.
That's really cool though, because number one, it helps understand the train to failure idea. Yeah. And the fact that you need to get to a certain zone of heart rate, which my guess is after a certain zone, you're reaching that threshold. And that's where the high intensity portion of cardio is probably way more effective than we think. And there's a reason why a lot of studies and a lot of people that are training are now moving to that higher intensity, smaller bouts, like you said, minimum of 10 minutes to reach the greatest stimulus. So you have the protocols, like the Nordic protocols. You run for as hard as you can for 4 minutes, wait 4 minutes, and then repeat. Next thing you're not having to run for an hour. And you're still getting the healthy effects of aerobic exercise. And of course, even with resistance training too. We even just talked about that recently of how some of these bodybuilders, they train often 6-ish times a week. But there have been bodybuilders who get the same effect working at such a high intensity a few times a week. And it's just the amount of the intensity that they're doing mixed with the appropriate movements they give you the greatest efficiency. Just again, make an interesting argument.
And then going back to just to throw a whole different side of things into this, because when I read this, I never thought about it from this perspective, but they also had with this last study with going about like high bouts of exercise for a minimum of 10 minutes. It also directly improved the afferent signal. So it's the signal of the body and the nervous system to the tissues. So it helped improve that stimulation, also help improve the catecholamines, so other transmitters throughout the brain. And the even more interesting part, it helped with lactate nitric oxide levels and the changes of acidity and base throughout the body.
Dang.
So that's a part I'm like, I never thought about the change of acidity levels to be improved. Like if someone's more acidic, it could lead to processes throughout the body versus someone that's more basic. But that's a whole side point in itself. But
a lot of people argue that disease is due to an acidic state in the body.
Okay.
I know a lot of functional medicine providers really to use that as an underlying theory to educate their patients, which is why the whole alkaline water thing I think took off.
Okay.
Was to try to change that whole process. But I'm definitely not saying that you need to do that. But what I am saying is there definitely is a correlation between the pH of cells and progressive disease.
That's
for sure.
So to take into consideration some of these studies, and this is more hypothesis, this is more or less my/our interpretation of the literature for a few different studies. And Doc, I would love your intake and point of view for this one. So when thinking about the varying intensities, especially when looking at the exercise of whether doing long bouts of cardio but less intensity will have a direct reflect, but it has to be at a 1 to 2 hour mark.
Yeah.
So versus high bout of exercise intensity, maybe for a short period of time. And can you combine those two together? So involving large motor units and full body exercise movement will have a better effect of the stimulatory effect of hormones throughout the body, but also just even the electrical signal body to the brain. Mm-hmm. So involving more full body exercise movements of rowing, of burpees, squats, of cleans, any of that will have a huge effect as well with this one. But I would suggest for most people, if you want to improve the growth hormone secretion, the peptides will act as an enhancement, like Dr. Addy said here, but involving long duration exercise of 1 to 2 hours of continuous movement, 1 to 5 days a week, depending on where your level is at, and then also improving and implementing high bouts of high intensity full body movements just so you can reach a threshold. And you need, like we said, a minimum of 10 minutes. I'm sure that can vary for some people. It's just the study, that's what they noticed. And that can be maybe anywhere from 1 to 4 days a week, depending on where you're at in your physical fitness levels.
Yeah.
But Doc, is there any thoughts with that related to your knowledge base?
That's really great that you brought those up, because that's a great way for people to continue to understand the importance of exercise. Mm-hmm. And again, if we could break down all the processes involved in exercise, we'd be here for days. Yeah. Because we just know how important it is. But lastly, I would say get good sleep, because that again is going to be a crucial way to get the proper amount of growth hormone. And yeah, there are definitely docs out there who are ready and willing to work with you involving peptides. Again, it's just a matter of what your goals are. I definitely don't want to deter you from using these peptides, because they are very, very helpful to get you where you maybe want to get to as far as general consensus of health. But the only thing, again, is just be cautious with doing it yourself, which I'm not recommending. And if you are going to brave it, you better have spent a great amount of time learning about this, because there is so much more that goes into creating this product for use. And there's quite a barrier to getting these. So that's why having a company or physician working with you is going to make things 10 times quicker and 10 times more effective. So.
And peace of mind with that too.
For sure. For sure.
Beautiful. So I thank you guys all, and I appreciate you for paying attention. I know this is part one of a bunch of peptides in a series that we're doing, and we're bringing a lot of Dr. Addy's knowledge with the foundation and some of the deeper specifics that aren't really brought to the mainstream to fruition for you guys. So if you guys have questions, comments, concerns, obviously leave that down below. We try to answer every single one the best we possibly can. But yeah, Doc, is there anything else you want to leave the audience with?
No, that was great. I appreciate you guys. Thank you guys so much. Look forward to part 2 coming out. And thank you guys so much. Have a great day.
Woo! Doc. Yes, sir.
Disclaimer, the content provided in this health podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or 911 immediately. Reliance on any information provided in this podcast is solely at your own risk. The creators and hosts of this podcast are not responsible for any actions or decisions you may take based on the information presented.
Thanks for joining us on The Functional Code. For more evidence-based health insights, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Remember, your journey to a healthier you begins with understanding the functional code. Until next time, stay well, stay informed, and embrace the science of living well.